Here I am today. My name is Bruce Firestone. I'm wearing my Sens hat, and I'm being interviewed today by Owen Gorman, and looking forward to it. This is, I guess, part of a school project. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's for an entrepreneurship class. So we have to interview a founder and an entrepreneur. So
Yeah, and I can see you're a bit of a Sens fan, maybe.
I am a Sens fan. I have my Thomas Chabot jersey in the
I
back
see it. Yeah,
wall.
number
So
72. That's great. So we're here together, and we're recording this. It's going to go on, I guess, my YouTube channel, and it'll be public, so it'll be available for Owen to use in his class project or in any other way that he wants to. So you sent me a number of questions. Why don't you ask them, and I'll do my best to answer them.
yeah, for sure. So I'll start off with the first one. And that's just at what stage in your life did you kind of start to think about entrepreneurship, and what were your influences and how they kind of affect how you kind of grew up, how you portrayed yourself like as a young adult?
Yeah, I think that for many entrepreneurs, they want to be entrepreneurs from a very early age. It's hard to believe, but I thought of becoming an engineer and an entrepreneur when I was 3 years of age. I mean, I was just a tiny boy, and as I grew older, into my teen years and then into my early 20s, I found out that a lot of people become entrepreneurs, not just me, but at least many of the ones that I've taught and worked with over the years, because they feel they can create more interesting work for themselves than other people can create for them. When my wife and I were much younger, we had one child. Today we have five, but I worked for the government of Canada for about 2.5 years. And it was a great job. They paid me $64,000 a year as a young engineer, which back then was quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
And, great benefits, great, holidays. I mean, all the things you'd want, and very nice people. I worked for very nice people. But the afternoon that I started the job, Owen, I said, I don't think this is for me. And the reason I took the job was, I had been living in Australia for many years. I had come back to Canada, and, as a young person with a wife and a child, you need to have some money. You need to support your family. So I took the job, but right away, I pretty much knew that I was going to, at some point leave. And again, the reason for that was I would hope to make more money as an entrepreneur than I was making as a government employee, but I was really basically hoping for more interesting work. Not that the work was terrible, but, would I have gotten to work on the Ottawa Senators deal, bringing a National Hockey League team to Ottawa, building the Canadian Tire Center, building a couple of thousand homes, building office buildings and shopping plazas, starting, I don't know how many different businesses, but, dozens of them. And, probably if I stayed to work for the government of Canada, the life would have been in some ways easier, less stressful probably, and in many ways easier, but not necessarily better.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that seems to be a very common theme, especially with what we're learning in class.
If you hear some birds in the background, right now I'm in Merida, which is the capital of the Yucatan in Mexico. So it is what it is. So I apologize.
That's awesome. No worries. And so for my second question, what was your first business? What was the market? What was the sector that it was in?
Well, to be honest with you, it was, my dad was involved with a business in Ottawa, and he asked me for a little bit of help, and I said, Dad, what are you up to these days? And he and a partner, I think they own 6 roller disco rinks. I don't know if you even know what a roller disco rink is.
Yeah.
I've been living in Australia, where I got my PhD from the Australian National University in Urban Economics. I did a master's degree in engineering science from the University of New South Wales. I had planned to stay there, but Dad needed a little bit of help. So I came back to Ottawa. That's how I ended up back in Ottawa. And my dad said just for 6 months, and here I am 30 some years later, still there. But so I don't know, maybe they had disco music in Australia, but I'd never heard disco music. I didn't know what a roller disco rink was. So I went and you put on a pair of roller skates, which you can rent, which I did. And they played Donna Summer or something like that, and you skate in one direction like this. And then the music stops. So you stop roller skating and you look around, what's next? And then the music starts, everybody goes in the opposite direction. So after about an hour of this, I said, wow, this is really boring. I like playing hockey. I like playing football. I play tennis, these days, pickleball. I like sports for sure, but I found roller skating a little bit boring. And I hope I'm not offending anybody. It just wasn't my deal. And so the next day I said to my dad, I think we're going to sell these. And so I went to, my dad had, I think, 3 partners. So so just so your listeners will understand and you will understand, there's the land and the building, that's the real estate component. And then there's the operating business, which leases from the real estate company. So I went to the other 3 partners and I said, guys, I don't know much about roller disco. I'm willing to trade our 50% of the operating business for your 50% of the real estate, because I know something about real estate. I'm an engineer from McGill University. I did some post-grad work and I had a little bit of experience. So I know something about real estate, but I don't really know anything about roller disco. And they said, oh, Bruce, you're a young man. I was in my 20s. And they said, we'd be taking advantage of you. The roller disco business is the cash cow. Real estate's kind of boring and doesn't really do much. It's not really that exciting. We'd be taking advantage of you. I said, look, I'm okay. You keep the cow. I'll keep the real estate. So we made that deal. And so we ended up with 6 or 8, I don't remember how, of these huge 1-story warehouses with like 30 or 40-foot ceiling heights, and, just one big long floor, and you could roller skate on the damn thing. And so we made that trade. And 18 months later, the fad died. Oh, and you could not pay a teenager to go there anymore. You couldn't give the money and say, go. It just, these things are fads and they come and go. And apparently they're coming back now, but I wouldn't recommend investing in them even today. So then we had 6 or 8 of these warehouses completely empty. And my dad was saying, Bruce, look what you've done, And I said, well, hold on a second, Pops. And so this was the beginning of the tech boom back in Ottawa, long before you were born. It was the 80s. And so what was happening was like Mitel was going, which was Mike Copeland and Terry Matthews and lots of other tech companies. And there was a thing, a management fad back then called management by wandering around, management by MBWA. And actually it was a pretty good theory that, let's say, Owen, you were the CEO or founder of a tech company. The idea was that you wanted all of your staff on one level, if you could do it, and you'd have your coders here. Can you hear me okay? Owen? I might have to move. Sorry, I think we froze, Owen. I'll have to move.
I can, oh yeah, I got you back now.
I think we froze. So where did I leave off?
You were just talking about Mitel and your marketing by wandering around.
Yeah, so management by wandering around.
Management.
BWA. So the idea was to have your coders in one area, your marketing people, your product managers, your finance people, they'd all be on one level, and you're the founder and the CEO. You can wander around and kind of see what's going on in this company. Are you still there, Owen? Shoot. So, Owen, I'm going to have to move where the signal strength is a little bit better. Hang on a sec. We're going to move. All right. Owen, are you there?
There, I got you back again. Sorry about that.
No, I'm moving. I think the signal strength wasn't good enough, so I'm going to go a little closer to a little closer to the modem, so I apologize. Just give me another minute.
Oh, no worries.
So I hope you're not getting seasick from this little adventure here.
No worries at all.
All right. So people will just have to put up with a video that's kind of in pieces, but that's all right. It's all part of the fun stuff that we do as entrepreneurs. Okay, so hopefully you can hear me now. So
Yeah.
This time, where do we leave off?
You're just talking about you're finishing off with your management by wandering around, just kind of how the ability.
So the idea was that the most valuable conversations you will have are kind of like, oh, hey, Owen, I meant to ask you this. It's kind of the water cooler idea. And proximity and maybe the idea of having organized meetings is not the best way to actually be creative. That sometimes creativity happens just because you see somebody in the corridor or you see somebody at the water fountain or the photocopy or wherever, and you have a short meeting that leads to some really great ideas. So the idea was management by wandering around, and we had these 6, 7 or 8 huge warehouses, and they all leased up. So we had these wonderful tech companies paying decent rents. And then what happened next was the value of these buildings went way up, right? And then in real estate, when the value goes up, you can refinance them, put a bigger mortgage in place, and then you can end up with taking money out of these buildings, maybe in the millions of dollars, tax-free. Because it's not income, right? It's just financing. And so I thought, oh, real estate's a pretty neat game, and that's how I got going.
Awesome, sweet. It's definitely seems to be it. I mean, now with the prices, it's definitely maybe slowed down a bit, but I know in the last kind of 3-4 years, there's been a bit of a resurgence in people trying to get into real estate.
Well, especially investment real estate, industrial space is very hot today. Retail plazas are hot today. Housing is a little slower now with interest rates doubling or tripling, but still industrial and retail plazas and some other kinds of different types of real estate. The one type of real estate you probably wouldn't want to invest in these days is office space, because the vacancy rates are quite high.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it looks like there is some kind of back to the office movement, but it's definitely slow going.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going now.
All right. So from your first startup to now, to where you're at now in your career, how has kind of your view and your perspective on entrepreneurship changed?
Well, I think the speed of business is much, much faster now. So for young entrepreneurs going into business, I actually think this is the best time maybe ever to be an entrepreneur. I mean, social media has helped. I mean, it's also hindered in some ways, but it's helped. Email is still a big and important part, messaging, texting. I mean, think about this, Owen. Back when I was your age, hardly anybody had a telephone. In Australia, there were 32 houses on the street that I lived, and only one of them had a telephone. So there were, when the fax machines came in the 80s, that was a huge deal, right? I mean, think about that. You could actually, have a document and send it to somebody, and it could be there in just a few minutes. And so the tools that are available in business and the amounts of financing and different types of financings that are available in not just real estate, in tech, and in so many other ways, there's so many more options. Now, the other thing that has happened, of course, is much more competitive. Terry Matthews, if you know, started, I don't know how many different tech companies. Mitel, of course, was one of them, but Newbridge was another, and many others. And he said he was glad that he started most of the businesses that he started before the internet age. And the reason for that is if you have an idea for a startup and you go on the internet, almost certainly somebody else is doing it. Mm-hmm. And that can be quite discouraging. But I tell a lot of my students and the people that I coach, so what? It isn't a question of having an idea that nobody else has done, because maybe no one else has done it because it's a bad idea. And if you find that there are competitors out there, okay, you just have to make sure you have some differentiated value, something that differentiates you from the competition, and you have to be able to execute well. So I think there's tremendous opportunity. The speed of business is great. There is more competition. But at the same time, the market is much bigger. Again, when I was your age, the population of the planet was maybe 2.5 or 3 billion. Today it's 8 billion.
Yeah.
And back then, out of the 2.5 or 3 billion, maybe 20% of them participated in anything recognizable as a modern economy. But today you've got 8 billion people, and probably at least half of them are involved with the modern economy, maybe quite a bit higher than that. So it is more competitive, but the world market is so much bigger. It's incredible.
Awesome. Yeah, it's definitely something that it seems to be more popular, and kind of everyone's just trying to get anything they got out there. So now kind of switching to the Sens, when you were founding the Senators, what was kind of your vision for the franchise, and what, like, how did that kind of idea, how did it start from an idea to actually pursuing the opportunity?
So in the 80s, I was building office buildings and shopping plazas and doing, residential subdivisions, and we were enjoying that and making money at it. But I thought maybe we could do something different. And I had two key young executives working with me, Cyril Leader and Randy Sexton. And we used to play pickup hockey together. And one day after a game, and they were much better hockey players than I was, by the way. But one day after we played a match, I said, Cyril, Randy, hang back a second. Just give me a second here. If you can hear a baby in the background, that's one of my granddaughters.
No worries.
She's I think she's 6 months old. And her name is Grace. Anyway, so I said, hang back. And I said, I've got a couple of ideas. And they said, oh, great. What are they? And I said, you got to remember, this is the late 80s, probably 87, 88, something like that. And I said, I think the mini storage business is going to be it's going to go gangbusters. Do you know what a mini storage business looks like?
Yeah, kind of like the warehouse. It's like diamond sort of thing.
Yeah, diamond storage is indoor, but back then it would have just been, you open a garage door, you put your stuff in, you close the garage door, add a locker. I mean, this is a very simple business. And it was mainly a mom and pop business. And I said to Sir Randy, I said, this is a national and international play. We could dominate this industry, I think. You couldn't do it today because, it's such a well-known thing. But anyway, so I said, so let me see what that's really interesting. I said, the other thing that we might do is I think the National Hockey League is going to expand soon. And I think Ottawa's gotten big enough that it might be able to support an NHL team. So we could do one of two things. We could go into the mini storage business, national and international, or we could, go after an expansion franchise for the city of Ottawa, which is our hometown. Now, what do you think three young men decided to do?
Yeah, definitely. It's more attractive to go to the NHL.
I mean, there was no competition. Mini storage probably would have made more money, almost certainly. But, founding an NHL team and building an NHL caliber arena, which is now called the Canadian Tire Center, is pretty exciting. So what we did was we bought 600 acres of land. Excuse me, I have a head cold. So we have 600 acres of land. You only need 100 acres for the actual building and the parking lots and some, stores and other things. So we bought 600 acres for, I think, $12,000 an acre. So about $7.2 million for the 600 acres. And the idea was if you put an NHL caliber arena and an NHL team in the middle of this 600 acres, the value of the land would go up. And so I said to Cyril and Randy, we will keep the 100 acres and the arena, but what we'll do is, we'll sell the extra 500 acres and it'll go from, say, $12,000 an acre to $112,000 an acre, go up by $100,000 an acre. And if you multiply $100,000 an acre by 500, it works out to $50 million. And that was the expansion franchise fee. So I said, we can kind of bootstrap this. We can, increase the value of the land, sell off the extra land and give that money to the NHL. And basically we got a piece of paper faxed to us, and it was actually a pretty crummy looking piece of paper, and that piece of paper cost us $50 million. So that's how we did it.
That's awesome. That's sweet. Well, it's kind of crazy to think that 30 years ago there's no hockey team in Ottawa, but
Well, it was a difficult time to found a team because Canada had lost two NHL teams right around that time. The Winnipeg Jets had moved, and the Quebec Nordiques had moved to the States. And fortunately, now we've got the Jets back in Winnipeg, and I'm hoping one day we'll see the Nordiques back in Quebec City. I'm a big fan of that, and I'd like to see a franchise in Hamilton as well.
awesome. Yeah, I think Quebec is on pretty close to top of everyone's list for sure.
Well, certainly it's on my list. I'd like to see, like I said, I'd like to see a team in Hamilton as well.
And so now kind of going back to a bit more of when you were starting out, when you were starting out as an entrepreneur and kind of early in your career, did you have any specific goals in mind? Like, was there a monetary motivation? Was it kind of more like a do good for society motivation? What was your
My
drive?
main motivation is what I mentioned earlier in the interview, which was to create more interesting work for myself than anybody else could create for me. So I started a newspaper, which is today called Ottawa Business Journal. We started a company called PETA, P-E-T-A, Presidential Executive Travel Apartments, which was kind of Airbnb before there was Airbnb. And like I said, we built lots of homes and subdivisions and industrial condos. So yes, I wanted to do a lot of different things and to build a bigger, better company. That was the main motivation. And in fact, I went from making $64,000 a year working for the government of Canada, and the next year as an entrepreneur, my pay dropped to about $30,000. So, if money had been the only object, I probably would have gone back to work for the government of Canada. But within a few years, I was making, money in the low seven figures, right? So, I was making more money, but that first year as an entrepreneur, it is what it is, right? I mean, you have to do what you can to earn a living and be flexible and creative. But you should not go into entrepreneurship thinking you're going to work fewer hours. You should not go into entrepreneurship thinking that it's going to be easy. It's very, very, very challenging, but you should not go into it unless you want to make more money too. I think that's important. I hear people say, they're other directed, and I get that, but to take on all the stress and effort of being an entrepreneur to make less money, that gets old. And so I tell people, money's not a bad thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, and kind of looking like kind of all around your history, you haven't only founded companies, but you've also founded foundations and nonprofits. Was kind of earlier in your career, and once you started to gain some success, was that something that you thought was important to you, kind of that giving back?
I did. I took inspiration from Frank Griffiths, who owned the Vancouver Canucks. And I think the Canucks were the first team to establish a foundation in the National League. I'm not sure about that, but I believe it is true. And so I thought it's very, very, very important for a National Hockey League team, a National Football League team, a Major League Baseball team, basketball team, whatever, to have a close relationship with the community. And by the community, I mean the corporate community and, of course, the citizens of your region. And a way to build bridges to your community is to have a foundation that can do good works, and so it was a desire to give back, but it's also a bit selfish. All right, because if you have a closer relationship with with your community, more people will attend your games. So I don't want to say that it was entirely unselfish, because that would not be true.
Interesting. That's one side I've never heard about it, of having a foundation and it kind of being not in it for selfish reasons, but kind of feeling a personal feeling of selfishness, which is, I find that very interesting.
Well,
Um,
one of the things, I do quite a bit of coaching now. I like coaching. I still think I'm 35 or 40 or 25 because so many of the people I coach are 25, 35, 45 years of age. So, here I am at 70 and I still think I'm a kid, but obviously I'm not. But one of the things I tell a lot of the people that I coach is you should have a for-profit business here and you should have a not-for-profit business here, and they work together. And I'll give you an example of that. In Ottawa, there's a company called Greco Lean and Fit. Tony Greco started it quite a few years ago, and you go in there, you lift weights, and if you're having a little bit of problem keeping your fitness up, you go see Tony, right? So Greco Lean and Fit. But Tony also has a foundation here called the Greco Foundation to Fight Obesity in Children. And he's very well meaning about that, because obesity amongst children is a real problem, not just in Canada, but in many countries. We're just not doing enough. Children should not just be sitting in front of their video game player for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, and sitting in a schoolroom for another 8 hours and sleeping for whatever hours are left over. That's not good for your fitness. When I was a kid, there was no TV. That's how old I am. And, wintertime, summertime, 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, we'd be out all day. And, there's a level of fitness that comes from just playing outdoors, winter and summer.
mm-hmm.
So he really was concerned about obesity in children. But, if you bring your son or your daughter who's having a weight challenge to the foundation here, and you as an adult, maybe you're suffering a little bit too of a challenge, you go to the for-profit business and you say, hey, listen, I'd like to sign up, here. So to treat obesity in children was free, but it also is a marketing driver for the main business. So I do think that there's corporate social responsibility, the idea of giving back to your community, that's all very important. But I don't want to just say that companies do it out of the goodness of their heart. There is a profit motive in it as well.
Right. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. But it's when you kind of speak about it, it makes sense that you can kind of how the two go hand in hand.
Yeah, and it benefits the business and it benefits the community. So I do think it's justifiable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So just kind of kind of going into your coaching and stuff. After you established yourself and you became who you were, became Bruce Firestone, what kind of gave you the idea? What made you want to start teaching and coaching?
Well, my dad, again, was a big influence in my life. He was a professor of economics at the University of Ottawa. And he was also an entrepreneur. He had some ups and downs like all entrepreneurs. I've had ups and downs. That's the way it goes. But there's something about teaching that I think goes hand in hand in some ways with entrepreneurs. Most entrepreneurs that I've known, by the time they're in their 50s or 60s, now I'm 70, they are thinking about their legacy. They're thinking about, can I help other people? And, I'm quite sure that there's lots of stats out there that show that if you started a business, Owen, and you had a coach, a good coach, your chances of growing that business faster, sustaining it longer, are probably much higher. And I believe that to be true. Can you teach entrepreneurship? Well, I taught entrepreneurship at the Telfer School of Management at the University of Ottawa, and before that at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. So obviously I think you can, but there are limits. You have to have a predisposition to entrepreneurship, some kind of predisposition. It tends to run in families, it tends to be multi-generational, but not always. And there has to be a willingness to take risk, a willingness to be creative and flexible. If something's not working, stop doing it. And if something's working, do more of it, right? So that level of flexibility is not in everybody's DNA, right? So you could teach some of the skills, but there has to be, at least in my view, some kind of a predisposition, and you have to be able to tolerate risk.
Yeah, I think that's definitely kind of like on your point of, it seems to run in families, and it seems to be,
Mhm.
it's not just people who just one day out of the blue decide.
So
That's what I'm.
when I was a young guy your age, all of my friends wanted to be in a band. That was the thing, to be like, I don't know, the Rolling Stones or something back then. Today, entrepreneurship is the new sort of, I want to be in a band.
Mhm.
My advice would be get yourself a coach. There's lots of business incubators around. There's lots of support for young entrepreneurs today that wasn't there, trust me, 40, 50 years ago. And then try it out, but you might find it's not for you. And it probably take you 3 years to find out. The first year in any business, even when you take on a job on the first year, you're kind of figuring out where the photocopy machine is, right? How to log on to the internet. I mean, you're just not, what's the culture of the company? How do I fit in? What is the work that I'm best suited at? The second year, you become much more productive. And by the third year, you're really flying, right? It's very true in entrepreneurship too. Your first year is very hard. And what happens is you're building, and your revenues, that hockey stick thing you see all the time, the revenue growth like this is very, very, very true. You're plodding along, you say, oh my God, we're not getting anywhere. We're not getting enough traction. We're not getting enough clients. We're not building anything. And then after a year and a half of really intense effort, to kind of go, oh, actually, we have some clients and we actually have some revenues. And then usually in the third year, you start to see that growth accelerate. If by the end of the third year, you're kind of where you were in the first year, that entrepreneurship might not be for you, but it's a 3-year process for most people to figure it out.
Yeah, that's definitely good to know. And I think it's definitely an important thing to realize when you're starting, that it's not, you're not successful right away, or very, very rarely.
Some are, but most are not. And what you have to be very careful of, and I think that's a strong point you just made, is you read in online or somewhere, you read about these people who build a business on a napkin and sell it for $1.2 billion 18 months later. That happens less often than winning the lottery. So you can't really, I don't want to compare myself to Steve Jobs, I mean, I would, or Elon Musk. I mean, I would be a dismal failure, right? But there's only one Elon Musk, there's only one Steve Jobs, so comparing yourself or Sergey Brin at Google, you have to be careful not to necessarily compare yourself to people who are, 1 in 5 billion or 1 in 2 billion. I don't know. These people are amazing. So you have to have patience. You have to be persistent, and just keep marching down the road until the end of your third year.
All right. And so for actually, yeah, based on the time, for my last question, what would you say are the most valuable skills that, like, you've already touched on it a bit, but what are the most valuable skills entrepreneurs should try to develop or try to find within themselves to try to find some sort of success? And are they more like learnable and developable skills, or are they just kind of something that you have?
Well, I'll tell you something that probably very few other people will tell you about success as an entrepreneur. And I've got the initials here, GTBMR. GTBMR, get the business model right. And a business model is not a business plan. If I were coaching you and you said, hey, Bruce, Prof. Bruce, I've got a 40-page business plan. Will you read it? I would say, no, thanks. A business model is usually a 1-page pictogram. In the middle is your business. On one side are your customers. On the other side are your suppliers. At the top is some kind of marketing. If you can't find, if you told me, hey, Prof. Bruce, I've got this great idea for a business, and to find my first customers, I just need to run Super Bowl ads that cost $7 million. I'm going to say that's probably not going to work, right? So you have to have a marketing plan. And these days, everybody says, well, I'm gonna run some Instagram, I'm gonna run some TikTok videos. Well, yeah, okay. But that's not a real marketing plan. That's just, they just throw stuff at a wall and hope it works. You have to have a way to acquire customers consistently and cost effectively. Do you remember that easy button, from Staples? You press it, that was easy. You have to have a marketing thing. You press that button and you get more customers. So that's something that's really important. So that's an important part of your business model is what is your marketing dimension. Then you have to know who your clients are and you have to know your supply chain. Most Canadian companies understand their customer base pretty well, but they're terrible with the supply chain. Walmart, for example, probably has one of the best, if not the best, supply chain management systems in the world. So they connect their supply chain all the way back to the manufacturer. Maybe they're pulling the coal out of the earth or something like that, but they have a supply chain that's very well developed so that these suppliers know that they need more basketballs in Tennessee and more hockey skates in Canada, right? So the supply chain is really well developed. So you have to understand your supply chain, not just one dimension, but sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 dimensions deep. And on the customer side, you have to know your customer and you have to know your customer's customer. And I'll give you an example of that, very simple. I was coaching some young people who wanted to build a spa, and I helped them find a location, and they built a beautiful spa, and they become very wealthy over the last 2 decades. So these were some of the early people that I was coaching. And I said to them, let's look at your business model, and we talked about it. And then I said, who are your customers' customers? And they went, what? What? Well, who are your customers? Well, 97% of their customers are female. I mean, for the facials and the manicure and the pedicure, there's some men who go, but mostly it's women. And so I said, well, what do the customers of your customers want? And I went, huh? I said, okay, most of your clients are women, and they have clients, and most of those clients are men. And what do the men who are second order removed from your business want from your business? They went, huh? So I said, what they want is they want gift certificates. Because, men like to, I'm married and love my wife. I'd like to give her something at Christmas. I'd like to give her something on her anniversary. And I like to give her stuff just because I like to. So I said, why don't you do some gift certificates? Oh, no, nobody really, I don't think that'll sell. I said, well, try it. So 6 weeks before Christmas, and it's more than 20 years ago now, they started to sell, $250 gift certificates. And lo and behold, they sold $300,000 in 6 weeks of gift certificates because all the men came in and said, I can't think of what I'm going to give my wife for Christmas or whatever. And then a year later, I get a panic call from the owner saying, Bruce, 20% of those gift certificates have not been redeemed, because back then you could have a sunset on them. Today, they have to be open-ended. You can't say they're only good for a year. They're good forever, I guess. But back then you could. And I said, that means you've got $60,000 of free money, basically. And but I said, look, if somebody shows up, in January or February and they have a 250, you have to honor it. Otherwise it'll be reverse marketing. You understand?
Yeah.
You'll get a terrible reputation. So I said, even though they're only good for a year, somebody comes in after 13, 14, 15 months, you're going to honor it. But at least they couldn't come back 10 years later and say, can I, but today you would have to honor it at any time. And Walt Disney does that. They have something called Disney dollars. And if you go to Disney World or Disneyland, you can trade $1 US for $1 Disney dollar, and it's got Mickey on it. They have about $1.7 billion on their balance sheet of Disney dollars that have never been redeemed. My kids have Disney dollars in there, somewhere. And so it's free money, but it shows up on your balance sheet as a liability, because if somebody shows up with $1.7 billion of Disney dollars, you've got to provide the services, right? But that's never going to happen. Those Disney dollars is probably in some sort of a garbage tip somewhere. But anyway, what I'm saying to you is a business model is the engine of your business. And if you get the business model right, you're going to have a much, much greater chance of success.
Awesome. Well, that's definitely really helpful and a good thing to think about, especially if I'm thinking about starting a business or if I'm looking into going into it.
I've known you for 45 minutes or something like that. But if you ever decide to start a business, Owen, you just strike me as being a very likable, bright, talented guy. If you feel like reaching back to me, I'd be happy to to give you my 2 cents for whatever it's worth.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that, Bruce. Appreciate it very much. It was great talking to you, and it was great getting to spend this 40 minutes with you. It's really helpful.
Enjoyed it. And like I said, once we end the meeting, it is a little broken up, but I'll put it on YouTube. At least you'll have the raw footage. You can do anything you want with it. And I will Dropbox as well. I'll Dropbox the actual raw footage. So if you wanted to take a few slices out of it and add to your presentation, and let me know how you do, okay? Whether you get a good mark, okay?
Awesome. I will. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bruce. Go Sens. Have a good day. Cheers.
Cheers.